Thanks everybody for joining us today for the discussion group, the law students discussion group, what you can do with your law degree. Tonight's focus is criminal law, and we have a couple of practicing attorneys from the area that are here to talk to you guys about that more in depth. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jonathan Guess. I'm the membership coordinator and database administrator here with the KBA, as well as the KBA's law student liaison. Today, as I said, we have a couple of members of ours who have great experience working with criminal law in the Knoxville area. First, we have Sarah Keith. I don't know how it's laid out on your screen, but she's on the top right of my screen. She is formerly with the district attorney's office, and she recently made the move to hang her own shingle and is moving into private practice. Sarah got her law degree from UT College of Law and was licensed in 2006. So we also have Andre Johnson of the Knox County Public Defender's Community Law Office. That's always a mouthful, but that's where he works. And Andre got his law degree from Hofstra University and was licensed in 2020. Before we get going, as a reminder, this is a very informal discussion, and the purpose is to allow you all to learn about what it is like to practice within criminal law in Knoxville, and to hopefully allow you to better determine the areas of practice that you would like to pursue when you begin your careers. Please as many of you already have, feel free to keep your cameras on, turn on your microphones to ask a question if you feel like it, or if you'd rather submit questions to the chat box. I'll be monitoring that, and I'll be sure to throw those in there as well. So, okay, so let's get going. So I guess the first thing I like to start out just kind of by turning the floor over to you guys. Sarah, we'll start with you. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving us an idea of where you were at in law school, and then just the path once you graduated to where you're at now.
Sure. So in law school, I had a friend who worked at the DA's office in my hometown, and I job shadowed her a couple of times and really enjoyed that. And so when the opportunity came, I applied for a clerkship in Knox County at the DA's office. So I ended up doing that the entire time I was in law school, clerked for 2 years at the DA's office. At the time when I was ready to graduate and get hired there weren't any spaces open. So what I did, frankly, was just pepper the state with resumes. It was fortunate that when I was trying to get hired, it was an election year. So if there are any 3Ls in here, it may be a really good time because that meant a lot of people retired. A lot of people moved around offices. There's just a whole lot of shakeup when there's an election, because a lot of people, even if the same person gets reelected, people will wait until kind of those terms end a lot of time to retire. So there was lots of movement all over the state. And so I sent resumes to every DA's office that would accept one. When I contacted them, I went on their webpage, talked to the career services at UT, and sent them out everywhere. I did several interviews and ended up working down in Cleveland in the 10th district. So I did Bradley and Polk County for a year. And the following year, a space opened up again in Knox County. So I ended up coming back closer to family and things like that. So I ended up staying in Knox County from 2007 through the end of this past year, 2021, and then going out on my own now. So that's the very quick version of how I got from law school to where I am today.
Great. Andre, what about you?
So in law school, I knew I wanted to do private criminal defense work after interning with the Nassau County District Attorney's Office. While there, I worked, so my undergrad degree is in linguistics, and I had the distinct pleasure of going to law school twice because I'm Jamaican. You can all tell I have a distinct accent. And so I went to law school in Jamaica, and then when I moved to the United States, I had to go back to law school. And so I had no idea about like summer internships and all of those things. So I was just planning to use my summer to chill at home and have a good summer, right? And then I got recruited by the DA's office to work in their special unit. They had this special unit called Special Operation Narcotics and Gangs. And that's what I did for my 2L summer because I did the JD degree in 2 years, but I disliked it. it felt like I was invading people's privacy. They had me listening to jail calls. I was working on MS-13 takedown. MS-13 is a big gang in Long Island, gang in quotation in Long Island, New York. And so I was like, yeah, that's definitely not what I wanted to do. So my second summer, I went and interned at the Nassau Legal Aid Society, and I fell in love immediately. I was like, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. And so I knew I didn't want to stay in New York though. So after law school, or like in my final semester of law school, I saw an opportunity to be a part of this amazing program called Gideon's Promise. And so I applied to Gideon's Promise. It's a fellowship for public defense officers in the South. And what they do is they place students who are interested in one of these fellowship with officers in the South. It's really competitive. They select students from most of the top 5 law schools in America. And I applied. I was the first choice for Knox County Public Defender Office. They were my first choice, and that's how I got to Knoxville. And I've been here ever since.
All right. I feel like I kind of slighted you a little bit because your background is a lot more interesting than the bio I gave you. So sorry about that. Okay, so Andre, we'll stick with you. So you kind of hit on this a little bit, but I'm hoping you'll expand a little bit. So why is criminal law an important area of law to you, and how did that play into you choosing it as an area to focus on?
I think there are different layers to the answer to this question. But for me, as a person of color, it's important that when persons who look like me are charged with a crime or accused of a crime, they see someone who looks like them being their advocate. And it's important for many reasons. One, I speak their language. Not many persons can relate to people of color if you're not from a similar experience, if you don't have shared cultural values, shared experiences, right? I can't tell you how many times my people of minority descent or African American male or females, they walk into court and they're like, oh my God, thank God you're my attorney. It gives them the sense of identity, and I can express that to the judge. I can say, hey judge, when my client come in here and he's like yo, or he doesn't mean anything, that's just his way of talking. That one. Two, I believe in procedure, and I believe criminal procedure is important. It's an important part of the representation that our clients should get. I also believe that quality legal representation should not be based on the number of zeros that a person can write on a check. And so for me going to law school, it was never about being wealthy or being one of the, if you make money from being an attorney, that's fine. But for me, I went to law school because I wanted to help those who we would classify as vulnerable and those who are less fortunate. And I think it's important that quality, fierce, aggressive advocacy is not based on how rich you are. And so the person who can't afford to write that, the 10 zeros, I don't know, I can't do math. That's why I went to law school, on a check should be entitled to quality legal representation.
Sure thing, yeah. Sarah, what about you? Are you muted?
You remember how I hate Zoom? I think there's a lot of commonality between most practitioners in criminal law, especially in public service government work, whether that's the PD's office or whether that is the DA's office. And not to not to put down anyone who is making a lot of money from that. But I think people go into DAs and PD, and certainly why I went into public service initially, for the same reason. We want to help people. And whether that is helping citizens who are accused of a crime or helping victims who are on the receiving end of a crime being committed against them. And that's what I was pursuing, was helping that angle of a vulnerable community, whether that was kids who had been abused or whether that was domestic violence, whether we were looking at community safety as a whole. That's where the angle I was coming from in pursuing prosecution. And also, I think it's important to recognize that both sides are extremely necessary to protect the system. In order for the system to work, ideally, everyone is acting ethically. And I wholeheartedly believe that you can prosecute and you can defend, and do both zealously and do it ethically. And I think that's a misconception. I think a lot of people in the community have watched TV shows and watch people on both sides cut corners or lie and do things like that. And Knox County has and again, I can contrast this to working in some other counties. We have a really friendly bar. There are certainly people who I might trust but verify, and certainly people that I don't trust as far as I can throw them. But for the most part, if someone on the other side represents something to me, I may be like, I need to have proof of that for file, but I know that they are not just trying to, pull one over. And as a prosecutor, it was certainly easier for me to do my job when I had competent, zealous representation on the other side. Prosecutors are tasked ideally with protecting both sides. You're supposed to seek justice. So it's your job equally to pursue a conviction if the circumstances merit that, but it's also your job to dismiss a case or reduce it if you don't have that. And when you only have one side of a story, because obviously can't talk to a represented person, and nobody's going to want the DA going and talking to their client, but the person who is effectively representing them can come bring that other side to me. And there are a lot of times where you look and say, there's this side, and where we are really is somewhere in the middle. And when you have a person who actually cares about the cases and is not just saying what's the best we can get, but will, that advocacy for their client isn't limited to motion practice and going in front of the court. It's those conversations and those relationships you build with opposing counsel and the reputation that you have with it. And some of the best representation anyone can do of their client or their position is to jealously guard their representation or their reputation when they are negotiating with the other side. And so, again, I think I did prosecution for 15 years, and I'm very grateful for every very competent attorney that I had on the other side, because it's frustrating when you're trying to represent a case, especially to a trial, and you have somebody who doesn't care about their cases. Maybe they are just concerned about money, and you as the prosecutor are trying to protect the record and protect their rights as well. When each side is doing it correctly and protecting procedure and protecting what the law is and representing that, each side can worry about what they are supposed to do, and that makes each side better. When you have the two sides not trusting each other to just be doing their jobs, or trying to make up for what the other one's doing or not doing, that's the kind of situation where people stop trusting the system. And so whether you decide you want to do criminal or prosecution or defense, and there's some people who are absolutely, I do prosecution, I cannot imagine defending somebody, and people who are on defense be like, nope, this is where my heart is. And both of those things are okay. But it's also okay to, try both and realize that you can be an objective advocate on either side. Again, there's nothing wrong with any of those three paths, and all three of those can be done very ethically and professionally.
Yeah, sure thing. So you kind of hit on this a bit there. So I'll throw this question to Andre first. So given your experience and your time in law school, what kinds of questions would you think students should be asking now to better help determine whether or not they want to pursue criminal law?
Firstly, I think it begins with, did you enjoy criminal law, or do you like criminal procedure? Do you like evidence? Do you like constitutional law? Because believe it or not, it's important to have, and it doesn't mean that you needed to have aced constitutional law and crim pro, but you need to have some, a working background or a working knowledge of crim law, evidence, because the truth about it is, most of what you will learn as a practitioner, you will learn it on the job. You're not going to learn it in law school. And you will make mistakes on this job. I've been doing it for almost 3 years, and I learn something new every day. So first you need to ask yourself, what is justice and what does that mean to you? What is it? How do you look at it? And do you have a genuine feel for people? Because, one of the questions that I get asked very frequently is, how can you represent those people? And I will always say to people, it's not my job to go into court to say whether or not my client is guilty or not guilty. My job is to go into court and to ensure that my client is given the safeguards of the Constitution and the statutes. And once I do that, if the result is guilty or the result is not guilty, I would have done my job. Other part of my job is also talking about alternate sentences, because sometimes, yes, the person did commit the act, but there are mitigating factors involved. So, in Knoxville, a lot of our clients, and I think Sarah would attest to this, have mental health issues, or they have drug addiction issues, or they have other social issues, whether it's homelessness, whether it is, they're living in a domestic abuse situation, whatever it is. You have to make it's not just the black letter law, but you also have to avail yourself of the other things that, the other competing stimuli, right, that you have to pay attention to. So I think you have to ask yourself, do you want to be in the courtroom? Because a part of this job is being as oral advocacy. How do you do with public speaking? Because you'll have to make arguments in front of judges. You'll have to make arguments to prosecutors, but you also have to learn about when it's time to walk away from that negotiation. If the prosecutor said, well, I've entertained you enough, well, maybe it's time, not to say anything else, because something else may piss them off. You also have to ask yourself, am I good thinking on my feet? Because that's something that you have to do, right? It's not always having a script in making an argument, because some judges will stop you and they will ask you questions and you have to be able to think on your feet. And you're not always going to get it correct, right? But it's because sometimes I go back to my office and I was like, did I really make that argument? That's such a stupid argument. I should have said this. I should have said that. But it's about challenging yourself to learn from your mistakes and to realize that as you grow as an advocate, or you will learn something new, and there's a new something else that you'll put in your arsenal. So it's important to ask those questions. It's also important to ask yourself, are you able to manage, especially if you want to work in a PD office? I think in Knoxville, we're very good with managing our caseload, but it's also a very hectic job. I handled on my rotation anywhere between 40 to 60 cases per rotation, which is a 3-week rotation. Sometimes I have 20 cases on one day. So, how do you cope with stress? That's something else you have to ask yourself. How do you manage a work-life balance? Because if you're somebody who you'll be working until 6 p.m. or 10 p.m. every evening, you're going to burn out very quickly in this job. You also have to get to a point where you're comfortable telling clients, do not call me after 6 p.m. You have to be comfortable with taking time for yourself. So those are questions I believe you have to start asking yourself from now.
Awesome, yeah. Sarah, anything to add? Are you muted?
I have the sniffles and I don't want anybody to have to listen to me like through the whole thing. So you're welcome for that. Whichever one you think is less annoying, having to tell me to unmute or to listen to where the Sudafed isn't working well enough. I thought all those were great answers. And I think that's something, especially with public speaking and the ability to work with other people, is something that most people don't think about. And especially with lawyers, everybody assumes that we're all really good socially and everybody's fine public speaking. But I don't know anybody who doesn't get a little nervous every time they do that. And so you do have to kind of get used to being on display to some extent, doing those things and being public speaker. Writing is really important, and they'll reiterate to that to you. Motion practice is important. You have to put in the hours to do that and to do that effectively and protect the record. But if you do not have the skills to, again, engage with people that you may not be happy about having a conversation with at that point, you're not going to be successful, because people aren't going to come into your office, whichever side you're on, and be a neat, tidy package of an experience that they have. Everyone has baggage. You're going to have victims who are pitiful. You're going to have victims who you cannot stand, and you think, well, I kind of see somebody wanting to do something. You're going to have clients accused that you feel terribly sorry for, but also that there's only so far you can help them, and clients that are going to be jerks, and you're going to be able to get them the exact outcome that they would really like about that, while you're sitting there with the meeting you just got out of thinking you wish you could have had that outcome for this other client. So things are not what you want them to be ever. So you are going to have to learn to ask yourself, can I meet people where they are and not where I want them to be? And I won't presume to know any of your experiences, but I know certainly from my experience coming in, I was coming from Scott County, Tennessee, went to school in Middle Tennessee, came back to school in Knoxville. And, no matter, what those experiences were, and trying to, meet different people and see different perspectives, there's nothing like being in the trenches and seeing people who've had a very different socioeconomic background than you, people who've had trauma you've never experienced. There's nothing that can prepare you for that other than jumping in the deep end. And so ask yourself if you're prepared to do that, because again, they're going to have, it doesn't matter what the demographic is, people have a lot more under the surface than most people, especially if you came straight through school and did not have work, or did not have something else you did before law school to give you that life experience. So again, be prepared to ask yourself, can I meet this person where they are, and understand what is going to be important to them in the advocacy at the end of this case. Can you deal with losing? And you need to define what winning and losing is. Again, TV shows and things kind of give this idea that you get a guilty verdict or you get a not guilty verdict, and that's kind of the goal. Again, there are situations where negotiating an outcome isn't going to be a win or lose. You might get some of the things you want, you might not get everything you want, but you still know that was a good outcome under the circumstances of this case. And there are cases you're going to spill your heart and soul into and get at the outcome that was the least desired for that. So you also ask yourself, can you define success differently than just a scorecard? Because if you're just keeping score on it, like Andre said, you're going to burn out very, very quickly, because things are just, there's a lot more gray area in these things than just tallying up a record. I don't know anybody who practices regularly who has any idea what their conviction or acquittal rate is, because sometimes you're trying cases because they need to be tried, even though the outcome may not be what you wanted, but you think it's worth the effort. So you have to ask yourself, are you willing to put in the work, even when sometimes you're walking into a buzzsaw? But like Andre said, what do you believe is justice in this situation? And sometimes you're walking in and it's just going to be hard. And then you've got to recognize the difference between those cases that are really hard and the cases that you just, it's never going to be what you want. And you may have to swallow some of your pride on that and get the outcome that's better for the case and the circumstances, and not necessarily what you want personally. So there's a lot of that, asking if you can set aside yourself for your client.
Awesome. You spoke to this a bit, Sarah, so we'll stick with you for this first answer on this question. So speaking more of the practicality of just the job itself. So what does your day-to-day life at work look like, and how does this area compare to other areas of law? I mean, you may not have worked in other areas, but just based on whatever experience you have.
And I think that depends a lot on whether it's private practice or government practice. To some extent, when you're doing government work, everybody thinks you're just working regular hours and you get those holidays off, you're 9 to 5 and everything's great. in perfect, that's exactly how it would be. But if you're practicing law as a litigator, as a trial attorney, the hours don't necessarily mean anything. You're going to work until the work is done. You have to set those boundaries for that. But there are days where, and you get things done. It kind of ebbs and flows. We always talk about the full moon. Whether you get like a deluge of cases and then things are quiet for a while. And so you take advantage of those quiet days and those, you go ahead and you leave, you set things aside, you turn off the ringer on your phone, and you take advantage of those for your mental health. But in Knox County, your day-to-day would be going into the office, making sure you have everything ready for court. If you're a criminal attorney practitioner on either side, you're going to be in court every day for the most part, especially working with PD or the DA's office. All of our courts run 5 days a week. We have 3 criminal courts and 5 sessions courts that are all operating simultaneously. And so you'll be bouncing back and forth between all of those courts every single day. And if you're in trial, you'll be in one of those courts all day and possibly multiple days up to a couple of weeks. If you just have, regular docket where you're doing preliminary hearings or doing motion practice, negotiating some cases, report backs, probation, all that stuff, you may be finished by lunch or a little after, go back to the office, preparing the docket for the next day, doing interviews that you need to do, reviewing cases that you need to do, following up on what happened in court that day and possibly what happened in court from days previous where you're trying to catch up on it. And so you're doing a whole lot of the paperwork and the research, the meetings, all of the non-glamour stuff happens the afternoons and evenings and weekends. And court is where you're going in. And ideally, you've prepared. I would say one of the most important things and that people overlook, especially in criminal practice, is preparation. You can make your life a million times easier if you put in the work on the front end so that once you get to court, you're prepared with potential changes and things, because I promise you, no matter how well you plan, nothing is ever going to go the way you wanted it to or the way you expected it to when you're doing that. Every witness you interview is going to come in with a plot twist. And so you have to be adaptable with that. But that's, your day-to-day is court, research, working your cases, phone calls to other attorneys. It's fast-paced. It's going to be hard for you to do things like nitty-gritty legal research while you're sitting in your office, because your phone's going to be ringing. You're going to have other attorneys talking. You're going to have client meetings. So that's why it ends up being you're going to have to work nights and weekends some of the time to get things done that are not plausibly done when an office is open. So you can have 9 to 5 on your website. You can have 9 to 5 listed on government offices, and you just have to learn how to balance that, because those hours are more like guidelines.
What about your side of things?
Yeah, for me I try to manage my calendar where I'm not in court every day, but it's really not realistic, especially when you have a misdemeanor DUI caseload. So I'm currently transitioning to felony, but on a regular day, let's say it's my non-rotation week, I would go to court, whether it's misdemeanor or DUI, and I would, handle my cases, whether it's a preliminary hearing. So what a preliminary hearing is, I know we have, Sarah said that before, I'm now mentioning it. It is where the state has to prove that there's probable cause for the arrest of the person. And so what would happen, let's say it's a DUI, the arresting officer would come in to testify as to what happened, why they pulled your client over, what happened after they pulled the client over, the interaction, did they administer standardized field sobriety testing, all of those things, right? And so at the end of the preliminary hearing, it's up to the judge to make a decision as to whether there's probable cause. If the judge finds that there's probable cause, the case is going to get bound over to the grand jury. If the judge finds that there's no probable cause, then the case is going to get dismissed. The prosecutor could then decide, if the judge dismissed the case, to just bring the case to the grand jury themselves. So typically, if I have a preliminary hearing, I would do that. Sometime I'm in court until 1 o'clock. Sometime if I don't have a prelim, I probably get out. The standard time I get out of court is around 11 o'clock. I'll go back to my office. I like to update my files as soon as I get as soon as I get back to the office. I'm old, so I don't have good memory. So I update my file. We have an in-office database that I use to make notations. So I would note what happened in court. I would note the salient points in the discussions that I had with the prosecutor and with the client. And even if we had to take something up in front of the judge, what was said, not everything, but the important points. Then I'll give my secretary my dockets and she would update those. Then I might have client interviews, which is an important part of my job. So I tend to do client interviews Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And what I would do is I would prep for my client interviews. So I don't open my own files because we have secretaries at the office. And so my secretary will open my files for me. That is putting the file together. So when I get my file, the first thing I do is I look at the charging instrument. And if any of you guys are going to be a criminal defense attorney, or if you're going to be a prosecutor, it is important that you pay attention to the charging document. The charging document is what is referred to as the accusatory instrument or the arrest warrant. Why is it important? It's the first piece of paper or the first piece of material that you'll get about what your client is charged with. And so you want to, especially when you're young in practice, when you just leave law school, you want to be looking at that side and side with the statute. Because oftentimes you'll find that the charging instrument is not sufficient to meet the charge that your client is charged with, meaning the charging instrument is missing an element. And that is something that you want to point out to the prosecutor. Depending on where you are with the case, you might not get much benefit in pointing it out to the prosecutor. And I'm putting benefit in quotation, right? Because if they dismiss the case, they could always bring it back. But what you want to say to the prosecutor is, hey, maybe you want to talk to this arresting officer that when you're charging somebody with a crime, you want to ensure that you're putting all the elements of that crime in the narrative of the warrant. So I begin there. That's where I begin. I match it up with the statute to see if anything is missing. Then I look, who are the witnesses who are listed, if any? Who is this officer? Who is the arresting officer? Then I look at what the potential sentence is going to be. I'm looking at, does my client have any criminal history? If not, I'm thinking about, okay, is this somebody who will be eligible for a judicial diversion? Is this a case that I want to use a judicial diversion on? And then when my client comes in for the client interview, we talk about what happened, we'll talk about the case. And the way I practice what is known as client-centered representation. So you will not see me being one of those attorneys that you see in a law show where they go in and they say to the client, hey, this is what you're going to do and you must do this. No, because I don't know what's going on in my client's life. So it's very unfair. It would be very unfair of me to say, yo, this is what you're going to do and this is what you must do. So what I say to my clients all the time is, you are my boss. So tell me what it is you want me to do, and that is what we'll do. So my job is just to give them information, and then they will make the decision as to how we proceed. And so we'll have that. We talk about possible, how we can possibly get the case resolved. And then if I need to do investigation, I'll send an investigative request to my investigator. Say, for example, I need him to go talk to a witness. Or in speaking to my client, I realize that my client has issues with drug addiction. I will say to my client, hey, we have social workers at our office. Are you interested in going into a treatment program, such as rehab or a halfway house? And most times it's not just to help with sentencing, but it's for the person, because you can't do this job and not care about people. If you don't care about people, this is not the job for you. I'm just being straight up, right? And so sometimes they will come in, or if you go to the jail, you'll see your clients, they're going through detox. They're detoxing in the jail, and it's hard. You see, they're at their worst. They look horrible, like they're about to die at any minute. And so sometimes you don't even talk about the case. You just talk to them about life. Yo, what's going on with you? What can I do to assist you? Are you interested in going to treatment? And some will tell you no, some will tell you yes. Some will be like, I just want to go to the methadone clinic, or Some will tell you that I've tried rehab and it did nothing for me, but I think maybe a transitional living facility will do something for me, like a halfway house, things like that. And so sometimes you're stepping away from the practice of law and you're really doing social work. The great thing about my office is that we have social workers. And so I can always make a referral to a social worker to get assistance with clothing, housing, food, mental health, drug treatment, alcohol and drug assessment, things like that. So there's no standard day in my practice. Sometimes I'll have on my calendar that I'm going to write this motion, but guess what? A client that I didn't even have on my calendar, that I hadn't seen in years, they show up at the office. And we just have to throw away the motion for now and go talk to that person, because that person you're probably not going to see them again. So it's very hard to maintain like a regular schedule. And so you have to be flexible. But, apart from court, client interviews, and research, the remainder of my day is made up of just whatever shows up.
Answer, yeah. Okay, so I'm switching gears a little bit to the work-life balance side of things. So Sarah, we'll go to you on this one. So being in a field that seems so serious and chaotic, actually, if anybody, I just want to mention, if you guys have any questions, I know we're past the halfway point here, feel free to throw them into the chat and I'll let you either ask it yourself or just prompt it. But any specific questions, just feel free to throw those into the chat right now and I'll be sure to get to them before we get done. So, okay, so Sarah, so being in a field that seems so serious and chaotic, you feel that you have a pretty good work-life balance, and what tips would you have for students who are worried about that aspect of practicing law?
I tend to think, especially when you first start out, it's really difficult to maintain a work-life balance because you are assumed, because you have a law degree and you pass the bar, that people think you know what you're doing. No one who walks into the courtroom for the first time has any clue what they're doing. Everybody's trying to fake it until they make it. And he said he'd learn something new every day for the past 3 years. I'm pushing 16 now, and I'm constantly learning new things. And so I think it's really difficult when you're brand new and people think you know, to stop and do other things when you think, I need to be researching this, I need to be working on that. And to some extent that's true. You really do need to put in the work, because there's no substitute for that, especially when you're just learning. So you've got to be in the courtroom, find a mentor to help you out, to know this thing that you're worried about on this motion, I can help you, we can get through this in much less time than you think, or no, this is just going to be some time in the trenches and you can do that. So mentorship is very important to kind of figuring out what your balance and your schedule is. The thing is, especially with criminal law, and I'm sure that other specialties would say the same thing, but your work's never going to be done. So you just have to find the place where you can't do everything, and you will never have a day where you're like, I finished every single thing on my to-do list today. And so I'm starting with a fresh slate tomorrow. It's not going to happen because like you said, when you think you're going to address one fire, 5 more fires spring up. And so you just have to learn to prioritize. So some of that is just trial and error. After you've spent too much time in your office and your pet like comes at you like you're one of those people returning from a deployment because you've been at your office too long, you realize that maybe you should come home a little more often. And so again, trial and error on that, but figure out a place every day where you're like, if this is possible, if this is not something that it is literally a deadline tomorrow, it can wait until tomorrow, then find a stopping point and leave that work where it is. Turn your phone off or turn the ringer down. Don't be afraid to tell people, I cannot take work calls after this point, because you have to have a time. In order for you to be an effective advocate, you have to be able to release some of that and focus on something frivolous, whether that is watching your Netflix, playing with your pet, travel, hanging out with friends or whatever. So you have that brain dump for that. And so the next time you go back and look at that motion or that issue that you were having problems with, you're looking at it from a fresh perspective. I think a good time to stop is when you start feeling frustrated and being like, I have to have an answer for this. That's your body saying, hey, you've thought through it as much as you can with the bandwidth that you have right now. So step back, refresh, and look at it anew. And sometimes, those answers come back almost immediately when you've taken a few hours or even a few minutes sometime away from something and just allowed your mind to do something else. Especially when you're first starting out, you're going to feel guilty sometimes when your work's not finished for stepping back, for taking that time, for using vacation you have, or trying to schedule your docket around, Judge, I can't do that. I'm going to travel that week. I'm going to take a vacation, whatever it is. It's hard to set those boundaries. But again, you cannot be an effective advocate if you don't plan to take time for yourself. And that has to be something that you actually proactively plan. That's why I say, come to a point every day where you're like, this is where my stopping point is, or come to a point where you're setting your docket where you're saying, I will take time off at this point. Because if you don't proactively do that, things will just keep snowballing and you will look at your docket and think, well, I have this important stuff scheduled. I can't take off at that point. And before you know it, you're neck deep, and those feelings that you had for guilt for planning to take off will be exponentially worse when you look and you're like, I'm trying to move things so that I can take off. So mental health really does have to be a proactive thing that you do. And also realizing most people went to law school because you want to solve problems for people. You care in some regard. You wanted to make a difference in some way. And so it's really hard to stop and step back when you feel like you owe that to somebody, and you've been successful. You made it to law school. You're passing the bar. You're practicing law because you have been academically successful. And so you want to continue that, and you feel like, okay, well, if I keep doing this, it's kind of the same pattern you've had for your life. I put in work, I have an outcome. And so you have to figure out where to draw that line, that you can't get that outcome if you are not sleeping, if you are not eating properly, if you are not taking care of yourself. And I hate to be, lectury or preachy about anything on this, but seriously, take care of your physical health too. Mental health is important. I never exercised or did anything. I lived off Mountain Dew and coffee all through college and law school. But drink some water every now and then. Seriously, eat a vegetable once in a while, and try to exercise occasionally. It doesn't have to be anything. You don't have to run marathons. But like, walk outside of your office, walk outside of your study, Carol, or wherever you're doing that. Look at the sun every now and then, get some fresh air. It really does make a difference to not get yourself in that bubble of academia or office employment. Just step outside, get some perspective every now and then.
Yeah. Andre, anything to add?
Yeah, I second everything that Sarah said. I think it's important. It's very, very important that you maintain a work-life balance. Find something that you enjoy doing. Like for me, I run marathons, Sarah. So that's what I do. I run marathons and Spartan races, and I enjoy hiking. And so, I always take time off to go visit with my family because my family still live in New York. And so I'll, take a week from work to just go visit my family. And I tell my supervisor, I'm not checking work emails during this week that I'm off from work. Sorry. If it is something that's super, super important, shoot me a text message, but maybe one text message and I'll respond. But I'll check my emails when I get back to work. Because here's the thing, and the way we've been programmed, and I'm deliberately saying program, is we were in law school. It was like you had to be studying 24/7. Then you leave law school, you have 10 weeks to prepare for the bar, and it was just all that. And it's like you're programmed to just continuously work and don't consider anything else, the external factors. But when you go into practice, it's a different world from law school. It's a different world from studying for the bar. And what I find with a lot of young attorneys, especially on the criminal defense side, is that they leave law school and we all have this grand idea that we're going to change the world. And so for many of us, we come with this perspective that we are going to shift the needle. But there isn't really much you can do as one person to shift this needle. All you can do is to ensure that you do your best and that you have excellent work product. And by doing that, you have to take care of yourself, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you're going to miss things. Okay. You are going to snap at people. You're going to be miserable. You're going to live a contentious life with opposing counsel and even with your clients, because you're just miserable and you're probably not enjoying the job. So find a balance, find a time to reflect, meditate, go for a long walk, play with your pets, whatever it is, find what it is that you enjoy doing and just do it. And also ensure that you don't have to be best friends with everybody you work with, but you should at least have someone that you can talk to at the office, like, hey, I'm going through a really stressful period right now. Work is getting the better of me. I have this case that I'm struggling with. What are your thoughts? Speak to the senior persons who are in your office. They know a lot, guys. They've been doing this for 10, 15, 20, some people 35 years. They do know what they're doing. Talk to them. Hey, this issue, there's no stupid question when you're practicing law, and especially as a new practitioner. Ask the questions. I promise you. There's like, I have asked questions where I'm like, oh God, they must believe I'm dumb. But you know what? It's better for you to ask it than to go into court and make a fool of yourself.
Yeah, agreed. But you guys segued perfectly into my next question, so I appreciate that. So Sarah, we'll go back to you for this one. So you mentioned mentorship. So students are always encouraged to seek out mentoring relationships. What kinds of things were you looking for in your current mentors, and what steps did you take while in law school to foster and build those relationships?
You know how he just said, ask the questions, there's no such thing as a stupid question? Find someone who doesn't make you feel stupid for asking the questions, because it is super important. You would rather ask a stupid question than make a stupid mistake in court. And especially if it's some kind of mistake that affects somebody's life. So it may be awkward, but it is a million times less awkward than going into court and having like from the other side of the courtroom or the judge, not the outcome you want. So find somebody who has more years experience than you, obviously, and is patient enough to answer those questions. I was lucky enough that I think people sought out, there are people where I'd worked that enjoyed mentorship. And so they were very proactive about coming to my office on the first day and following up in the following weeks about, hey, how's it going? What do you do today? Tell me about it. And just making mentorship very conversational, where it didn't occur to me initially that that's what was happening. It was just, okay, how's this going? And then very non-threatening kind of, well, let's talk about that decision you made on that. How would you do this differently? What if it was this? And so if you have somebody who has proactively asked you questions, checking in with you, don't be afraid to follow up with them and ask those questions, because again, we're all faking it until we make it. And so a lot of our egos don't permit us to say, yeah, I'm really confused and I feel like I'm in over my head on this. So when someone asks you for help, you're like, oh no, I got it. Follow up with them. They're asking for a reason. They remember, we all remember what it was like walking into a courtroom and having people, clients, victims, witnesses assume we knew what we were doing, and then knowing every other attorney there knew absolutely for fact we had no clue. And so they want to help you, find somebody who's willing to have those conversations with you, and will bounce things off of you. They respect you. It's not somebody who's just dictating to you, here's what I would do. You may have some older attorneys who are convinced that the law has been downhill ever since they started practicing. They peaked and they want to give their war stories and just tell you how it was when they did it, and they don't understand why you're doing what you're doing. hear them out. Sometimes they have very good advice, but sometimes, the law has changed since they were doing what their peak was. And that's a hard thing too, is kind of navigating who is there because they want to tell you about their ego and their exploits and what a great attorney they are, and someone who wants to make sure that you can be a good attorney. And so you can learn a lot listening from the people who are fueling their ego as well. But sometimes that's learning how you don't want to be. And so get that perspective from those people in your office. Get that perspective from people who are practicing and may not be in your office, that you can bounce things off of in a much more objective thing, because you're not playing the office politics with it. But I do think it's incredibly important to have people who understand your perspective, especially as a new attorney, and what those struggles are. And again, remember, and they can save you a lot of grief when you go to them, especially things that seem like a huge deal at the time. They'll be able to guide you and be like, yes, we need to be very, very careful about this. You've got a landmine in front of you, or, whew, I remember being scared to death about that, and I have a really easy solution for you. Don't be afraid to ask the question. There's no sense in reinventing the wheel. They may have motions to help you with. They may have a bank where you are, cutting and pasting to some extent into that stuff. So don't rely on mentors to just fix things for you, but don't be afraid to ask if there's an easier way to do it from the way you're doing it. And so I think that, to sum up, these things, the people who want to help you, the people who respect you, and the people who are decent enough to act like whatever your stupid question was is not the stupidest question they've ever heard, and they're going to be patient enough and recall what it was like to be there. And before you know it, you'll be having conversations back and forth where they're bouncing things off of you too. And so the best mentorship, you have that two-way street where you have that respect and professional dignity between the both of you.
Awesome, yeah. Andre, what about you?
Yeah, mentoring is important. It helps you to navigate the workplace, and it also doesn't, it not only helps with work, but it also helps with maintaining that work-life balance as well. And so I always say, seek out someone, not necessarily someone who shares your ideology, but someone who you can respect, someone who is understanding, someone who will take the time to sit down and have a conversation with you. It is important that you always have someone you can bounce ideas off. Like for me, the one thing that I'm very anal about is my work product. I'm extremely anal about sending motions to the court, because this is my representation to the court, right? And so I always ensure that before I file a motion, I always send it to my supervisor and be like, hey, can you look this over for me? Is it correct? Is there anything I need to change? Are you understanding what I'm saying? And that is, you have to be able to put yourself in that position where you're saying to somebody, criticize my work, right? Because a lot of us, we have egos and we don't want to hear that, hey, this is wrong and you may want to change this, or your grammar is off here, whatever. But again, it's not about you, it's about the client. And once you learn to accept criticism, constructive criticism, you're also going to be in a place where you're going to become a mentor, because soon you're going to become the senior attorneys in the office and in the county, and soon you'll be supervising externs and interns. And so you want to pass on the same level of knowledge, but also the same level of care, understanding, not being cocky and arrogant and dismissive, but taking the time to listen, because it's law and it's complicated, guys. And, many brilliant people struggle with understanding a statute. Sometimes I'm like reading a statute, I'm like, what, huh? And I'm like, okay, I'm not getting this. Let me go talk to somebody. And it might be like my next door neighbor at the office. I'm like, yo, what is this saying? They're like, oh, this is what it's saying. And I'm like, oh, you have that eureka moment. And so we'll all be in that position from time to time. But but it's just ensuring that the person that you select to be your mentor possess qualities that are not going to make you feel inferior and stupid.
Awesome, yeah.
Can I give a plug real quick?
Yeah,
For
sure.
a KBA? Join your local bar association. If you don't already have the student membership, you definitely need to have it when you get out, because there's barristers, there's new lawyers, there's committees for criminal law, for civil practice, for estate, for everything, and Mentor for the Moment. And so you don't have to go on this alone. There's always going to be somebody. And again, the Knox County Bar, and comparing it to some other places I've worked, is really excited about helping young attorneys or people who are trying to get into a different area of the law. So take advantage of that, because you find some bars in other counties where they really are just trying to compete with each other, even when they're on the same side, sometimes it seems. And Knox County, you really have some people who care. There's no shortage of people who would be very happy to take a mentoring role for you in whatever kind of law you decide to practice. So yeah, join the Bar Association.
If I may add one thing to that, Sarah, some of you will go into solo practice upon leaving law school. Don't be afraid to stop us in the courtroom and ask us questions. Even when I started working at the PD office, I would stop persons. I'm like, hey, I'm Andre, I'm new. I have a question. Can you explain this to me? What's going on here? And that is how I made friends with a lot of people that I'm friends with now. A lot of the older attorneys at the private bar. It's just stopping them and engaging in a conversation. It doesn't even have to be about the law. Just like stop them and introduce yourself to them. And when, like, I was making an argument in court one time, and Judge Cerny asked me a question that I really didn't know the answer to. And Mike Whalen walked up to me and say this, And it was because I introduced myself to him a couple weeks before, and we started chatting. And, if I see him in the corridor, I was just like, yo, what's up? What's going on? So those things help as well.
Awesome, yeah. We're about out of time, guys. So Sarah and Andre, if you don't mind, would you mind entering your emails into the chat box? So if any of the students want to goes down and have any questions to throw at you guys, speaking of all this wonderful mentoring that you would do. So we've got just a few seconds here. So I like to ask this question last. Every once in a while you may have no answer to it. It's kind of a dumb question, but I like to throw it out there just to close up. So Sarah, we'll start with you. So what do you expect to be the next development in criminal law, and how it would pertain to maybe some of these students and how it would affect them in their careers? You're muted, Sarah.
What I hope to see is the next big push in criminal law is more focus on mental health. And I think we're seeing that culturally with less of a stigma for people seeking treatment, counseling, whatever. We start treating mental illness the same as we treat physical illness. We're not there yet, but I think you'd find people in prosecution and defense who realize that there are a lot of people who are slipping through the cracks, and people who can be helped, people who, if they were having some better mental health services, we could disrupt where they are in getting involved in the criminal justice system and hopefully intervene before things get worse. Because once you get into the system, it does end up being kind of a snowball effect. And nobody likes that revolving door. Nobody likes putting someone in jail because we don't have mental health options, because we don't have hospitalization or we don't have treatment facilities. So hopefully the next big thing we see is more resources and more attention given to people with mental illnesses, because I just don't think that we are addressing criminal justice until we start addressing mental illness in a much more holistic way than we are right now.
Yeah. Andre?
I concur with Sarah. I want to 100% with what she said about mental health. But and so I'll go on a different path with my answer. I would like to see more diversity in terms of I would like to see more people of color getting into criminal law, whether it's prosecutors or criminal defense attorney or judges. I think, and even right across the board, law as a career field lacks diversity. I think, when you look at, and if you read any of the books out there on mass incarceration, if you read the new Jim Crow, if it speaks about the disproportion, it speaks of how disproportionately African Americans and people of color are represented in the criminal legal system. It is important for criminal defendants, when they're people of color, when they come into the legal system, to also have representation that looks like them. I'm not saying that a white person can't represent them effectively. I'm just saying, it would be nice to see more people of color in the criminal legal system. For example, I think I'm probably the only Black male my age who is a criminal defense attorney practicing in Knoxville right now. I don't see another Black male on the criminal defense side in around my age in Knoxville. I think in terms of Black men on a whole, I've seen 3 of us, myself, Aubrey Davis, and another, another Black man, older gentleman. And so the system lacks diversity, and I think it's important. And it's not just color, it's also diversity of thought. I think when you look at Knoxville, and this is not my politics coming to the fore, but I think the bench in Knoxville lacks diversity. It lacks diversity in terms of political thought. It lacks diversity in terms of gender. It lacks diversity in terms of race. And so that's where I hope to see some change.
Yeah, great answer. Well, that is all the time we have, everybody. I really appreciate you guys were so thorough with your answers and your thoughts, and we really appreciate it. I hope that you all, the students that were here, were able to gather some things. Be sure to take their emails down as a resource. They talked about the collegiality and the willingness to help the students or anybody that's hoping to get better with practical law. And we hope that you guys start taking those steps while you're in law school. So that was kind of the whole purpose of this. So we've got a series of these coming up. We've got 2 more this week and 2 next week. We're going to put this on YouTube if you need to revert back to it. But thank you everybody for being here. Sarah and Andre, especially. Thank you both for doing this for us.
Jonathan, if you leave, if I may make a small plug, if any of you guys are interested in interning at the PD office, we are accepting interns for the summer. We also accept externs. I'm one of the extern supervisor. So if you are interested, just shoot an email. Then you can shoot me an email to say, hey, I was on this panel discussion with you. I applied for an externship. Would you mind being my supervisor? And I'll definitely say yes. And I'll, tell people at the office, hey, this person applied. So, if you want an externship, if you want to see what criminal defense is like, yeah, come extern or intern at the PD office. We don't pay, but it will be good experience.
There we go. Practical
and if any of
steps.
you are interested, I do know who does the extern and intern coordination over at the DA's office. So you can shoot me an email and I'll put in a good word for you.
There we go. You guys, everybody, thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.